architecture needs to kind of get off its high horse. We need to kind of be architects without a capital A and kind of like get back to like our origins in a way. That's my interpretation. So to kind of be able to see through the everyday, see through everyone's eyes. Is it kind of like immigrant families, or is it people who have healthcare issues, who actually need that help, or people, or just everyday people, right? And understand where they're coming from.
Hi, my name is Anita Nowak, and I'm the author of this book. Welcome to Season 12 of Purposeful Empathy, a show that is dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand that the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the show. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today, I am joined by Kelvin Kung, who is a project architect at Gensler, one of the world's leading architecture and design firms in the world. Over more than a decade, he's worked on projects as varied as art galleries, community centers, shopping malls, residential high-rises, sports arenas, luxury retail, and healthcare, and more. He is passionate about designing with empathy and designing for equity using the power of technology. This includes machine learning within palliative care and to address the needs of people with accessibility needs and neurodiversity. I am so excited to have this conversation. Welcome to the show, Kelvin.
Thanks so much, Anita, for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. So I think I want to start with, based on the work, what I've read about your work anyways, your signature design style is inspired by, could I say it, love and empathy? Why do you suppose that's the case? Like, is there a backstory that would take you here?
Yeah. I mean, it can be a long story, but like the short version is that because like I was born and raised in Vancouver to immigrant parents. I'm first generation college educated, first generation professional. So I kind of arrived to McGill, the School of Architecture, that, was a very, in a way, very prestigious school and a very selective school, right? It's the top 10% of engineering that can get in. I had to pull off a 96% average in public school to have that opportunity. And I moved cities, so it was like a very big change, but I kind of found myself lost, right? Like there was a lot of my friends, like their parents were professionals or they were architects, and they already knew a lot of like Mies van der Rohe, Corbusier, all these kind of different architectural values and systems and kind of the language behind it. And I was just like fresh. And my first year, like I always kind of felt that I didn't really know what I was doing. And it didn't feel that like, why do we had a lot of discourse about creating interesting forms or interesting, cool geometries. And even though I thought that was important, it was like, well, I think we need to do more. Aren't we civic members? Aren't architects supposed to be able to provide for people? So like I kind of traveled to Rome, to Japan, and I read a lot. I studied, and I happened upon a course, Alberto Perez Gomez. He's the Said Bronfman Professor at McGill, Order of Canada. And I decided to do a master's with him after my bachelor and professional master's. I did a post-professional master's with him, and his whole book is about built upon love. He actually talks about it, and he said some things that really kind of inspired me, and I also other professors as well that really inspired me. And that's when I started coming back in second year, where I'm like, okay, well, when I started going to some of his lectures and just opening myself up to different influences, that's when I saw, oh, okay, wow, like I can actually like use architecture as a vehicle for love and empathy and be able to be thoughtful of others. And it kind of also came from being an outsider, right? Like if I'm LGBTQ, so growing up I always felt that kind of sense of isolation. Being BIPOC, I also felt that sense of isolation. So how do we provide spaces that are truly loving and empathetic and warm? And once I had that epiphany, I found it like going to Tadao Ando's building in the Chichu Beachescan in Japan. It's an art museum, the way he uses natural light. And I was like, I had this epiphany. And then I came back and I started getting like top marks. Started winning competitions, started getting awards almost every semester. And like it kind of came naturally in a way. And I say it, I guess, humbly, because I also was very inspired by very talented classmates and very talented professor who pushed me and also inspired me with their words. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Oh, I love that journey. And, I love the fact that you were mentored by somebody who, allowed love to take center stage, and that, that you that you are inspired by the possibility that designing and architecture can be a contribution to something much more than a building just standing there, right? And much more than just the aesthetic of it, but the actual sort of sense of belonging and inclusion that can be included, and what that inspires as a result. I love all of that. Okay, so I always invite my guests to sort of suggest a few questions. And in your case, you had said we could talk about empathy in design, empathy in tech, empathy in healthcare, empathy with equity. I've added the equity part. So I want to ask each of those. Okay. So
Okay.
we'll go one at a time. So we've been hearing a lot about the importance of AI and how we could jump off a cliff as a result of what may happen with technology. ChatGPT, we're in the middle of the year 2023, and I think I feel apprehensive. I'd love to hear what you think about empathy and technology, specifically how we can leverage AI to lead with empathy.
Yeah, so um the story behind that was it was COVID. I mean, I've always been interested in technology and kind of having all those struggles throughout my life. I kind of um had a lot of ideas of how architecture can help, but then I saw this kind of opportunity with tech, and I had this one specific epiphany during COVID because, like we were all hit so hard with it, and I was just struggling. Like, how do I help people beyond the buildings, beyond the rooms? How do we really get to the people's like it sounds maybe a bit cheesy. How do we get to the hearts? And the first thing is like we need to listen to them. We need to get them to the table and give them a voice and then listen. And that's like the first step, right? So how do we get those stories? And I was working on community centers, and we were part of this. There was an engagement team. So how publicly funded community centers work is that we have engagement as part of the requirement. You have to go and get these surveys done, and then go for in-person session. They're pretty regulated, and I just like volunteer myself. Like, can I be part of the engagement team besides being part of the architecture team? And they said yes. And as I learned about it, I realized like, okay, for a community center, the kind of community feedback we get is a couple hundred people. It's limited to one or two sessions, and it's also like it takes a lot of time, right? So to kind of process the comments and the amount of people required, it's like a team of 4 or 5. You can only get a couple hundred, and then there's like kind of different kinds of answers, like long form answers, short form answers. So I was like, okay, why don't we just use that epiphany was like during that kind of like dark moment. I'm like, oh, okay, actually, like it clicked in my head. We can use natural language processing to analyze survey results. And the whole idea of it was that by freeing manual time to process comments, you can actually use the team's time to go and like knock on doors, not like physically, but go and meet the people where they are, find out events, like host more events, get more people to come and actually say hello, and also leverage digital platforms to get to the people that can actually travel there. Maybe they have accessibility issues. And then another piece is that we can actually understand negative comments. Like I'm actually like the fan of like this like expression, like instead of getting furious, we get curious.
Uh-huh.
So, so a part of the commentary from engagement for community-centered design is like understanding what are the bad comments. There are some that are like, I really hate this, or I really hate this rendering. I really hate how this park is so dark. I really hate there's no ramps because I'm in a wheelchair. I really hate that there's not enough car spots for people with accessibility issues. And I really hate that it's not close enough to the entrance. I always have to walk. Or I'm a senior. There's a lot of like seniors who have things they want to say. So, and the team tells me they get so tired, like they don't want to read negative comments all day long. They feel sick and tired after. I'm like, I'm a fan. I want to know because I think at the core of negative comments, it's like it's not really anger. It's actually sadness, feeling sad, feeling disrespected. And to me, that's a great sign. Okay, there's a strong conviction and opinion. Let's understand. And you with machine learning, you can use that to kind of like process it and treat it almost like a science. So you can kind of like understand people and get to their hearts and understand what they want rather than kind of, absorbing it all the time. And the real goal is really trying to get to understand how to provide for people, right? And that's like the kind of the beginning of how all this started for me. But ever since then, like I really see that tech can be used in very beautiful ways, right? I was at Microsoft judging these products where the teams came up with tech to support people with dysarthria. So they have speech challenges. They are trying, maybe not the right word challenges, but things they want to they're trying to communicate. So how can tech be leveraged to help suggest and autocomplete things so other people can understand them quickly? So you can provide, they can also find work, employment issues, and employment opportunities. So I think it's about perspective and how tech is leveraged. I remember growing up in public school in Vancouver, three of my classmates had severe forms of autism. So we were always trained, we were always kept in the same grades and same groups. So they get used to us and we get used to them because a couple of them had specific needs that takes a lot of time for kids to adapt to. So one of them had whenever she got overwhelmed, she would start like screaming and she would come up and pull her hair. So especially if you have long hair, she would pull on and wouldn't let go. So an average person wouldn't know how to deal with that. But because we were very trained and we were very like understanding and taught to have empathy and understand where she's coming from, then we don't react. We just kind of let it happen and we all helped kind of calm her down or de-escalate. And those are the people that I want, like I think giving voice to is very powerful, and understanding them and how to help them. I think tech has a lot of opportunities for that.
Hmm. I love that. It sounds like you went to a great public school in Vancouver.
Yeah, we were hippie. Like we grew salmon from eggs and we released it into the indigenous creek. It was a strange public school.
Wow, cool. I'm sure that was very helpful for you as you were flourishing as a professional. Hey there, I don't mean to interrupt a fabulous conversation. I just want to draw your attention to the fact that there are so many other great conversations on my YouTube channel. Over 120 episodes with already 25,000 views, completely organic. Thanks to you, my listeners, viewers, watchers. Please subscribe. The world needs more empathy, and you have a role to play. Okay, so now let's talk about empathy and design. How can we expand beyond architectural roles using empathy?
So I guess part of it is maybe it's kind of architecture needs to kind of get off its high horse. We need to kind of be architects without a capital A and kind of like get back to like our origins in a way. That's my interpretation. So to kind of be able to see through the everyday, see through everyone's eyes. Is it kind of like immigrant families, or is it people who have healthcare issues, who actually need that help, or people, or just everyday people, right? And understand where they're coming from. Because I think with modern architecture, capital M, since the 1900s, I'm also a part architectural historian studying with history and theory. So in the 1900s, modernism was always about kind of strong forms and beautiful forms. And they're beautiful. Like, of course, if you go to some of my favorite buildings, it's like awe-inspiring. The forms are so beautiful. But I feel like humanity is not really like that. We have dark spots. We have kind of like one of my really good friends, Valentina, she's also a PhD at architecture at McGill. And I'll never forget, we visited some buildings together. She's like, Kelvin, I feel like even the dirt under my fingernails is visible in this kind of building.
Juliet.
Yeah, it's too perfect. Like it's not human.
Oh.
It's meant to be experienced as almost like an artistic object, but you cannot live in it. It does not support civic life. And I think part of it is like kind of studying history, right? One of the oldest manuscripts we have access to is Vitruvius's books on architecture, the 10 books of architecture. And he kind of writes it's like 2000-ish years ago. And the three main qualities he writes about is firmitas, utilitas, and venustas, which translates to the three ideals is strength, utility, and beauty.
Mm.
Those are the three kind of major aspirations that architecture should aspire to. But the other interpretation that I learned from Alberto and other McGill professors is that venustas is typically translated as beauty. It's like and we understand that as visual beauty because we're a very oculocentric world. One of the first books we read in McGill was Eyes of the Skin. So how do you see through the world through your own skin rather than just the eyes? But the point was that venustas, the argument is that it's actually alluding to Venus, the goddess of love. And the idea is that with Venustas, Vitruvius didn't just mean look for a visual beauty. It's about creating buildings that can move the human heart
Mm.
and create empathy. And to me, it's about being able to design and think for the other. So to me, I think looking at history, you can actually see like architects had different roles, right? My other favorite period that I was kind of specialized in during that master's was Filarette's work. He's like the 15th century Renaissance architect. He did a whole treatise called the Trattato di Architettura, and he did a bronze door for St. Peter's. But he writes about it in his first book about the role of the architect, and he kind of compares actually the architect is actually the mother, and the patron is the father, and he kind of compares creating a building as like having a pregnancy. For
Hmm.
the architect, the building is inside your body. You let it grow as an idea, and you give birth to it. And if the building is sick, you're sad. And if the building like gets demolished or somehow gets destroyed, you'll also be sad and you'll think about it. So I think there's kind of a lot of different interpretation about how architects can be, and it kind of got lost in different periods of history. And he also writes the first architecture I remember in Filetto's book was that it was I think it was Adam that left the sanctuary and he covered his head to block himself from rain. So the first act of architecture was an act of protection.
Hmm.
So I feel like there's a lot of kind of ways for architecture to kind of get back to different ways when it was a very strong, civically powerful um, intention to be able to help people, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And you think we've drifted from that because we're like building up IKEA buildings, basically.
Well, I think being photogenic is a very strong kind of like it's very desirable. You can Instagram it, you take beautiful photos, you can publish in magazines. But I think there is the story that's underneath the image that architects can get to.
Hmm. And so part of that must also be in the training of architects, right?
I think so. I mean, there's different camps, right? Some of the architects wishes we study more humanities. Some of the architects think we can go more and more about like parametric design. And it was interesting to entertain and learn from everyone. So the training piece, I think to be fair, it's like there's too much to learn
Mm.
because we have to learn from structure engineering all the way to like design and then also the digital programs to produce the work. So I think part of it is being open to conversations and being having that collaborative spirit, I think is the first step.
Beautiful. I love that. Makes me think of the school where I studied at McGill, Faculty of Education up the hill in McTavish, the School of Brutalism. That's what it's
Yes.
called, Architectural School of I'd never even heard of that before, and discovered that it's a quintessential brutalist school building with like little slats for windows. I mean, there's no natural light. Like
Yes.
inspiring educators, right? Like it's nuts. It's nuts. Talk about getting it wrong.
Yeah, that was a very interesting period. I studied with Anne Marie Adams about that History 4 in McGill, and the whole brutalist building came up from a historical moment in the 60s where the world was in Cold War, right? So it was a reaction to kind of like nuclear threats, and there's different aspects. A true brutalist building always has hammer raised concrete to create that texture because it was something about defensiveness. The entrances are always kind of semi-hidden. The Yale School of Architecture is very similar, and only the people who hang out there, I remember, was able to kind of get through this labyrinthian way of getting into the building. So I understand it from a kind of period piece, but to recreate that now, I would not really understand why we're trying to do that. It's beyond trying to just create cool looking sculptures that are not very livable.
Right. So what do you think the current mood is? Like what is the school of what is emerging or is in the process of ascending?
I think I actually think people are starting to understand more and kind of get to the whole narrative piece about like from banks to hospitals to everything. We're starting to talk more about kind of the visitor journey.
Mm.
So from the very entrance, from
Mm.
even the first contact all the way to getting to the say the hospital, to the doctor's room, right? Gensler publishes a lot of this kind of research. Some of it I found really, really beautiful too, right? Like there was one study about how do we treat for the patient care experience.
Mm.
So the kind of interesting results of that study was that actually when someone's inside the visiting room, the quality of the visiting room finishes whatnot is very important because they actually spend a lot of time in the waiting room, the waiting room. And then actually getting into the examination room, the patients care a lot about being able to see the doctor's screen. So they feel like they're involved in their own healthcare. And
Mm.
with tech and whatnot, I think people are going to demand more of that kind of like customization and be involved as part of the kind of healthcare team.
Mm.
So I think it's starting to become more where people will become more involved into architecture. Somehow it's kind of aligning to what I was interested in a long time ago.
Hmm. Since you mentioned Gessler just right now, I was going to ask a question about, I went onto their website, I was very curious, and their mission is, we are guided by our mission to create a better world through the power of design and believe the source of our strength is our people. So I'm curious to know, since I spent some time thinking about co-creating cultures of empathy, how you feel the company, creates a culture that leverages the strength of our people, of your people.
Yeah, I'm very flattered to work at Gensler. There's a lot of very talented people, and we're truly our brand is one firm. So we're connected through teams, through everyday meetings, through our CEO Andy and Diane, who just came to visit us in Toronto. Um, and I think they really make a lot of effort to try and expand and let everyone connect. So, for example, recently I kind of had this like invite to Gensler, one of my kind of a friends, Ken Ohashi. He's the CEO of Brooks Brothers, and I just talked to Eric, the managing director at Gensler in the Toronto office, and I just said, hey, like, can we please invite him? And he's, oh yeah, perfect. And then because it kind of just like went on its way, and the New York team was super supportive of that. So everyone just came together, and everyone pulled their like time together and made it all happen. And like the Singapore office managing director sent me an email, and they were all very excited about all this kind of stuff. So I think that's the part where we're strong because we're 7,000 people, we're $1.8 billion revenue. We're the world's largest design firm, and we have 52 offices across the world, from Tokyo all the way to Shanghai to Europe. The Paris office managing director is also from Montreal, so he's a Montrealer. He also sent me an email, and Philippe is really, really cool. And so I think that's where our strength comes from.
So they're living their values. Okay, good to know. Good to know. I love when people walk the talk. So, Kelvin, you're in the process of developing machine learning based surveys to capture the needs of healthcare professionals in clinical spaces. Can you share more about this? It sounds so interesting.
Yeah, so that's like a natural progression from designing community centers. It kind of gave me this precedent in my mind that, oh, we can use it for addressing health issues. And this was a kind of a struggle for me too, because my dad had cancer in high school, and it was a very sudden thing and a very aggressive form of cancer. So that actually almost affected me so much I couldn't get in, like I almost didn't make it all the way to university because I was just like exhausted from the whole family. We went caretaker mode, pharmacy management, sorting through all the pills, doing chemotherapy, researching and listening to the doctor. And I also have to be a translator because sometimes the medical jargon gets really intense, and helping read through the paperwork. It's kind of the immigrant family experience is like that. So it came from that, and my dad, unfortunately, just as I graduated from McGill, like he passed away. It came back, the cancer,
Mm.
and so for a long this time, I couldn't step in the hospital. I just spent way too much time in ICU, palliative care, all of that. It was just like it was too much. It was I'd put on zero suits. We had to have masks on all the time because the chemotherapy was so strong that you can't step inside a room. You can't even bring flowers in because you bring certain bacterias.
Mm.
So yeah, I couldn't step inside hospitals for the longest time. But this year there was a challenge, the Shift OA challenge, that asked about the Ontario Association of Architects had a design challenge asking about how do we use architecture in healthcare. So that's where I kind of stepped in. Like, I got to conquer this fear because I'm like, okay, if I actually bring all my thinking, all my skill sets, I can help people. And I like it's kind of that engagement where if you lean into your fears and try to conquer it, that comes from a very strong place. So of course I was in this like cafe over Christmas, just like my Christmas holiday. I was just designing these palliative care rooms and everything came together super quickly. And the idea is that I want to be able to learn from all the different healthcare professionals too. Like I'm in contact with some of the doctors through our McGill network. Some are from Harvard too, and they have so much to say. Right, I was at Dr. Sanders' lecture, the palliative care chair at McGill right now, and one of the respondents, when I asked about the question, how do we improve architectural design? Everyone has so much to say. And I'm going to have a meeting with him soon. One of the one of the participants said, like, yeah, like her mother, when she was in palliative care, rather than sleeping on the bed, they spent their days actually spent on the lazy boy because that
Mhm.
was better for the back. They felt more comfortable. But the way the room was designed was that the phone jack was right beside the door because I think it was a long time ago. There was still a wire attached to your phone.
Mhm.
So every time they were on their lazy boy, but they're on the phone talking to a family member or whatever, and the doctors or nurses or whoever comes in, they would trip over the phone jack.
Simple
So
fix.
it's a simple fix where like you can just move the phone, the data, whatever. We do that as architects. Um, for the room, and that would have been a lot more thoughtful. But it's such a small thing; it could have improved the day-to-day experience by so much. And that's where I want to know, like all these kind of from small to big things, how do we improve a palliative care or hospital experience, really? Because even if you're an outpatient for cancer treatment, chemotherapy, a lot of this stuff is hinged upon the patient experience that can be improved from very, very small things. I remember a lot of it just came from spending so much time with my dad, right? There was no music in a room because the room was not equipped for that, but we spent so much time there. And I had to bring my laptop and preload music on it and kind of play music for him. And I just remember seeing his face having such a sense of relief, listening to his favorite songs, the Beatles. So that I think using tech to kind of access all that information is going to be so helpful to guide the design process.
That's right. User experience, as you said, from the start to the finish. Why wouldn't we if we can, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
love it. Okay, also in terms of empathy for equity, as a board director with Archives, which is the largest independent archives for the LGBTQ history in the world, you're designing the first LGBTQ plus virtual gallery. Tell us about your vision for this initiative. It's so cool.
Yeah, so that came from also spending a lot of time with the archives group, and they're a wonderful community um, of people who've been really supporting queer rights, LGBTQ rights, and I love them. They have so much to share. So this kind of idea also came from this idea of, designing for people with accessibility issues, um, and people who are in smaller towns that cannot make it into the bigger cities. Because we know like a lot of queer people come to bigger cities because they can live with other people, find like-minded people, find anonymity as well. With so many people, it's hard to be able to pick people out. So my idea is that can we provide a sense of safe space or brave space, whatever you want to call it, for people who can't reach the archives.
Mhm.
We can't physically come because we're in Toronto, we're a downtown location. So if they want to read books, they want to read historical, like we have a first edition of Oscar Wilde too, right? Like we can, have certain parts that we can scan, digitize, whatever you want, make it into a digital experience. And then I've been already working on this kind of digital model that can be experienced through VR, through their phone, through their laptop, whatever they want. Part of it, I'm also recreating a historic queer space from the 80s, which was raided before. And I've met the seniors who used to visit these kind of speakeasy community center spaces, which was fascinating, just the historical kind of uncovering of all of that. And how do we actually recreate experiences that are meaningful for everyone? And all the while providing access for the future, for future generations. And I think a lot of that came from I spent time this last year at the 519, which is the local community center for queer people and LGBTQ plus families. It's one of the largest ones in Canada, and I've been mentoring a lot of the queer kids, and I think like they can use someone that or something that feels like they have someone in their corner, or something that is more engaging than a website, right? They can go and visit spaces in a safe space on their own terms. That's kind of where that thinking is.
Love it. Love it. Well, look, the way I see it, you've been working for a little over 10 years as a professional now, and you're working at the premier architect and design firm in the world, winning all sorts of awards, really pushing the envelope in terms of how tech can be helpful in people's lives, using love and empathy through your whole design. I wish you nothing but the best. It's been a wonderful conversation. I'll ask one final question, which I ask all the guests. And that is, if you can remember a time in your life when you were touched by empathy and what that meant for you, when you were on the receiving end of empathy, and how that mattered to you.
I'm gonna be greedy. I'm gonna make two small stories about that.
Sure.
The first one was, I think, working on the Western North York Community Center, which we won the Canadian Architect Award of Excellence for. And that was, I think, it was a long journey of design. It was very, really, really, really tough. I worked really hard. But I think one part of that story is my partner, who kind of watched over my shoulder designing that, because this was during COVID. Like, we were all work from home. So he saw me do all these design options, and we were vibing over between love, empathy, design, and science. So we kind of, one time we kind of had this epiphany together, whereas, you're kind of working on this terracotta facade design. So, we were kind of looking at the different two phases of light, how it's a wave, how it's a point, but also the ridges become inspired by terraformed ridges in the ocean. So we access something that's truly universal and science-based and artistic, but it's also human. It's the earth, and that's how that kind of design thinking went along. And I remember presenting it the next morning after sleeping at like 3 a.m. to the partners, and they were like, "Oh, this is great. Let's just go ahead and keep exploring that." And it was it's presented on the cover page of the Canadian Architect magazine. So it's I think, from my partner, the first story, and the second story is receiving empathy from, I think, the nurses. That night my dad passed away. I think, even though they were professional caretakers and professionals in the healthcare industry, I really feel for them, their burnout and whatnot. But that night when my dad passed away, I remember they cried with us. That for that moment, like, I felt, even though it felt extremely lonely, I felt like they cared. And I think just being in that space where people cared for that one moment was very empathetic, and I'll never forget that.
Yeah, the empathy superheroes of the world, the nurses and the teachers and the social workers and the humanitarians. God bless them. And I'm sorry for your loss. Do you want to share anything about your dad before we say goodbye?
My dad is, I think he's a man that gave up a lot so I can have a lot of opportunities. So I love him a lot, and he did everything he could for his family, to be in service of his community, which really inspires me, and I hope to carry that energy forward.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Well, I think all of his sacrifices have borne a lot of fruit. It sounds like you are doing him proud. I wish you all the best, Kelvin. It's been such a pleasure to have this conversation.
Thanks so much, Anita.
Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy. Thank you so much for watching an episode of Purposeful Empathy. If you enjoyed this conversation, subscribe to the channel and also consider picking up your copy of Purposeful Empathy. It's an invitation to dial up empathy in your life. The world needs more empathy. We need more empathy. What are you waiting for?